Welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
It's the Rock Newman Show.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Welcome back, folks. This is the Rock Newman Show. I am Rock Newman. We're broadcasting live from Busboys and Poets in the Langston Hughes Room. And I just say it again and again and again. Every time I say we're broadcasting live from the Langston Hughes Room, I just feel real good about that. I want to tip my hat to the visionary who established this business. He is a gentleman by the name of Andy Shalal. He refers to himself first as an artist, second as a social activist, and is something else, and it's a businessman fourth. And he has created an environment here that invites one and all to come and to feel comfortable for racial and cultural exchange and upliftment. I just am extraordinarily impressed about this particular establishment. I welcome one and all to come down. You will find just a beautiful experience here at Busboys and Poets, and of course we invite you. We normally broadcast the Rock Newman Show on Saturday mornings from 9 to noon, but today we wanted to do a special broadcast where we could recap and help celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Martin Luther King, the historic March on Washington that actually took place on August the 28th, 1963. There will be another march and rally where the president will speak on a Wednesday. It is Wednesday, August the 28th. My guest this hour is someone that I've had just so much admiration and appreciation for a very long time. I became first aware of her as she was the steward of my alma mater, Howard University, for just a great run. Dr. Joyce Ladner, welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Glad to be here.
You know, one of the things I'd like to do, maybe the live audience might not be able to see it. Hopefully the cameraman will be able to see it. Right here is a reserved section, Wednesday, August the 28th, 1963, March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. She kept that all that time. Congratulations.
And in good condition, too.
And in very good condition, very good condition. Well, then, let's start there. Let's start on that day. Tell us how it felt being out there amongst something that was truly historic, transformative, and has become the thing of legends.
Okay, I was 19 years old. I had spent the summer working in New York on Bayard Rustin's staff to organize the march.
Now, you know we're going to want to talk about Bayard Rustin.
Yeah, Bayard. He called himself Bayard.
Bayard Rustin, one of my heroes, and truly one of the unsung heroes.
Right.
He was acknowledged today, and President Obama is giving him, the highest honor. But I do want to talk about all of that. But I'm sorry. So you were on his staff.
I was on his staff. There were about a dozen of us, young people, who worked with Bayard that summer. The way I got to be on the staff was that all the civil rights organizations were asked by Bayard and A. Philip Randolph to send two of their members to New York to staff the March on Washington. So Cortland Cox and I were assigned by SNCC to go to New York to work. And
now, you were with SNCC. You were in school here at the time?
No. I am from Mississippi. I was a student at Tougaloo College.
Okay.
At the time. Tougaloo is now called the Civil Rights College because it was the center of activity in Mississippi.
Sure.
Now, going back to how I felt that day, my job on the march had been to raise money and to recruit black people in the Deep South to bring them to the march. And because I had been very, very active in the movement in Mississippi, going back actually to high school, I was able to go out and crisscross Manhattan and all the boroughs over to New Jersey and raise money to bring to charter buses. And every time I went out, Rochelle Horowitz, who was in charge of transportation, said, "Joyce, you brought enough money back to charter another bus." And that was a really good feeling. I wish I knew how much money it cost back then, to charter. Maybe
Sure.
I'll try to reach. But anyway, we came down the day to D.C. to the Statler Hilton Hotel on 16th Street the day before the march. Early that next morning, about 6 o'clock, we SNCC people went out to the Justice Department to picket because we had 3 civil rights workers in jail in Southwest Georgia for treason. That was the charge. And all they were trying to do was to register voters. So after that, I went over.
So just so folks understand.
Right.
1963, you had 3 civil rights workers whose responsibility was to register people to vote.
Right.
And they had been put in jail, charged with treason.
Treason. And sedition.
Yeah.
We could not get any attention brought to that case. We couldn't get the Justice Department to investigate. So being true SNCC workers, we went out at 6 o'clock that morning before the march and picketed the Justice Department. Afterwards, I walked over to the mall, got there around 7:30, and was just very, very anxious that people would show. Bayard was there, some other staff people were there. We were all wondering. We didn't have social media
Sure.
and modern means of communication, so we didn't know who was coming.
Sure.
People said they were, but within, I guess, around 9 o'clock, he began to see people drifting in, even earlier, around 8 o'clock, small groups, first individuals, then small groups. By 9 o'clock, just large groups. And as those buses, 200 buses, began to come into D.C. and park, and large groups of people started coming on to the mall with their banners. And then, it just got swelled and swelled and swelled. It was actually an extraordinary day for all of us. And I think the thing that impressed me, there were several things. One is to never have been able to see that many people before. I dare say that no one on that podium had ever seen 250,000 people. So I was able to go on the podium, to go everywhere with this badge.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. And we had 2 stages. There were 2 programs. The first one, after people marched to the mall, the first program was at the monument. And at a stage there, Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee were the MCs. We had a lot of people speak. We had a lot of singing. The SNCC Freedom Singers sang. Peter, Paul, and Mary, Joan Baez, Bobby Dillon, who was our friend.
Yeah,
we
sure.
knew them. In fact, Bobby used to hang out at our apartment at night, and I just wanted him to go home so I could go to sleep on the sofa he was sitting on. He was sitting there trying to court my sister. But
this was 1963. He had a little jungle fever going on.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he sure did. But what happened is that we had a program, on the on the Washington Monument. There was a stage there. And it was a warm-up program for the main event.
Sure.
After the main event, there was a lot of confusion now. People say that the only woman who spoke at the march was Josephine Baker. That was another exotic and exciting thing for me to see.
Yeah.
I'd heard about Josephine Baker as this artist and dancer.
Right.
And here she was, decked out in her French Legion uniform.
Yeah.
With all her medals, because she had been a courier during the war.
Yes.
Akin to a spy, actually. And I guess she had written a speech, and she must have told Ozzie Davis that she wanted to give it, so they turned the podium over to her, and she read a long speech. You can find it on YouTube, actually. She spoke for about 10 minutes. Fred Shuttlesworth spoke. A number of people, who were not on the main programs.
Was she the only woman that spoke that day?
No. On the official program, after this program was over, the warm-up was over, we marched over to the Lincoln Memorial. And for the official program, women civil rights freedom fighters were honored. Among those were Medgar Evers, who was the scheduled speaker for
Correct.
the other women.
Right.
She didn't show, so Daisy Bates of the Little Rock Nine gave a rousing speech. You can find it on YouTube as well. Gloria Richardson from the Cambridge, Maryland movement was there. Lena Horne was there, but she was not one of the freedom fighters.
Now, Medgar Evers didn't show, you say?
No,
And
she didn't come.
her husband?
He had died. He had been murdered On June 10th.
Yeah, just
yeah.
a month, but so
So
before,
one
a couple
can
months
understand
before.
why
Right.
she didn't come.
Sure.
So Gloria Richardson, Daisy Bates, Diane Nash was invited. Her name is on the program that you'll see on the internet.
Sure.
She didn't come either. There was one other. Mrs. Lee from Mississippi, whose husband, Lee, had been murdered as well by a state legislator on the courthouse grounds in Liberty, Mississippi, because he had the nerve to try to register voters and register himself.
Yeah.
So she was an invited guest as well. But this is where, on this program, Marian Anderson was to open it with a song. She was caught in traffic, and someone else filled in for her. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And John, the controversy of the day really was about the speech that John Lewis, who was chairman of SNCC, had scheduled to give. John had come up to New York and hung out with us for about a week before the march, passed the speech around, and we all looked at it and made comments on it.
Sure.
And it was a collective statement by SNCC, how we felt about what the status of civil rights in the South. And the night before the march, Cortland Cox saw, out in the lobby, saw a stack of Whitney Young, head of the Urban League's speech.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Oh, this is great. I think I'll go and get John's speech copied."
Right.
And he put it there, too, thinking this is...
Sure, a good thing to do.
Right.
Right.
And little did he know that immediately got the speech. Someone informed Archbishop O'Boyle of Washington as to what was in it. And he called Burke Marshall, Civil Rights Division head at the White House, or Justice Department rather, and complained. Then Burke Marshall informed Kennedy and others, and made a call to Bayard Rustin and to A. Philip Randolph. Complained.
What was in the speech that they were complaining about?
Well, John said...
Y'all getting some history here on the Rock Newman Show.
The first thing John said was that the civil rights bill that was before the Congress was too little, too late. He said that if we do not get our freedom and do not get it now, we will have no choice but to march through the South the way General Sherman did, scorching everything in our wake.
Who?
Yeah, I thought it was a great speech. We all did.
John Lewis.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And so they we said he also said we want our freedom, we want it now. And the Archbishop, said that all things in good measure come when the Lord wants them to. So we got irate. We were absolutely pissed off. Mm-hmm. Especially when the other civil rights leaders, like Whitney Young and Roy Wilkins of the NAACP, the moderate people, they started complaining and said that they wouldn't speak if John didn't tone it down. And we said, among our SNCC workers, we said, fine, we don't care if they speak or not.
Uh-huh. Y'all was radical. Y'all was some troublemakers, wasn't you?
We were called the Green Beret and the shock troops of the civil rights movement. And I think we lived up to the bill because we went into areas that were the toughest before anyone else would dare go in to try to organize people.
Right.
If you look at Selma, if you look at Albany, Georgia, SNCC workers were in there a long time before Martin Luther King ever came to those places. Mm-hmm. And so we really felt that an archbishop had no authority whatever to tell us how we felt and were to feel, given the fact that he had never walked in our shoes, had never been in the South working with people, and endured the conditions that the local people endured. Right. In the end, John finally demurred and changed, for example, to march through the South like Sherman did. He put the word nonviolently at the end of the sentence. The tone of the speech remained very much the same. Right. But, a lot of damage was done because, they didn't have a right to beat up on us like that. Right. And we always pushed back. I mean, we didn't trust anybody over 30 anyway.
Yeah, sure. So let me ask you, first of all, you said a few things that are fascinating, that, you were in New York and going over to New Jersey and that sort of thing, and you were a Mississippi girl.
Yep.
Now, where did you get it that at that early age you were out doing things, and the things that you were doing could cause you to get shot and killed on a moment's notice? Did you realize it while you were doing it and did it anyhow, or were you just oblivious to the threat?
Well, you weren't oblivious ever because danger was real. I mean, you see people, friends shot. Jimmy Travis, one of my friends, was shot in the neck. I mean,
Did he survive?
Yeah, fortunately he did, and lived a long life. You're always afraid. We were young, and we weren't stupid, though. We didn't take unnecessary chances. But, I mean, just to be out there was a great chance. I got the courage, I think. I learned early on that courage was the ability to act in spite of fear.
Yeah.
I remember Bob Moses, we had this conversation once, and he said that he made the decision very early on that he was not going to be immobilized by his fear, and that he understood that you either deal with your fear of death and then move on, or you don't. And I think all of us dealt with it and moved on. I mean, you never... And we also had strength in numbers. We relied on each other.
We need to hear these stories. I, frankly speaking, am troubled. I am troubled by the lack of connection that our 16-year-olds and 26-year-olds and 36-year-olds have with what you went through, with what you and other folks who faced death daily so that we could enjoy, so that they could enjoy some of the fruits of labor that you put forth. And I don't know what it is going to be. And as I sit here and talk about it now, you know, whatever voice we have here, however much reach we have here, part of what I want to do is to play a role in connecting the absolute courage and valor and commitment that you and your generation had, the efforts that you all took to create a freedom that was so long overdue, and to make sure that generations now and generations that are coming up understand it just simply should never be forgotten. You all are owed a great debt of gratitude.
But, you know, it bothers us, too. We're very troubled, and I say we because we're closer than family. You know, if you go through that, it's like being in a war.
Yeah.
You come out very, very close because you bond at the level of potentially dying. It bothers us a great deal that people like Jay-Z would say that his presence alone is a contribution when in his back and forth with Harry Belafonte. Yeah. You know, it bothers me terribly that a little Wayne would use Emmett Till's death in a song in the most derogatory way possible. Mm-hmm. It bothers me that young people don't get it. I don't blame them entirely, but I don't let them off the hook either. Because you have each generation, as Frantz Fanon once said, to paraphrase him, each generation must define its mission and fulfill it or betray it. I think there are a lot of young people out here who are doing wonderful things, great things. And they don't have the conditions we lived under of life and death. So I don't expect the same thing from them. In fact, I think they have to decide how they're going to fight the struggle. But we decided, I call ours the Emmett Till generation, because, you know, to a person, everybody I know in SNCC saw the picture of Emmett Till's grotesque body after he'd been bloated on the cover of Jet magazine, and we vowed then that we one day avenge his death. I know I surely did. Didn't know how. I was terrified that it might happen to me, to my brothers. But the story on this is Mrs. Till, Emmett's mother, said that she told the funeral director that she did not want them to do any cosmetic enhancements to her child's body, his face, because she wanted the world to see what they had done to him.
Right.
And you can imagine after several days in a river, they pulled him out, they gouged out his eyes, they shot him in the head, and looked like a monster.
Yeah.
And that was what was on Jet magazine when I was 12 years old, on their cover. And that's why I call ours the Emmett Till generation, because if there was a symbol of all that was wrong, just like Trayvon Martin is for this generation. Yeah. And I hope it stimulates them like it did us.
You know, we talked with Janetta Cole about
my dear sister out there.
Her incredible love for jazz. I talked to Mark Morial about New Orleans and the Neville brothers, and you talking about Emmett Till makes me think about a song that Billie Holiday did. It's perhaps one of the most haunting songs ever performed, and she did it, and I loved it, and I loved Nina Simone's version of Strange Fruit.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Yes, I mean, it is haunting, with, especially with Billie Holiday's rendition of it. But I grew up under the shadow of lynching, with not only Emmett Till, but there was another man lynched. Mac Charles Parker was lynched in Poplarville, Mississippi in 1959. Just now it would be only 15 minutes from where I live with the highways and so on. And so lynching was potentially what could happen to your father, to your brother, to your uncles, your grandfather. And I can't describe how powerless I felt as a child when these things happened. But I know that somewhere deep inside me, perhaps because of my mother's courage in standing up for what she believed in, and her family did the same thing. One day, you know, we just said we were going to get rid of these lynchings, so we were going to fight against it. I had an uncle, a great uncle, who was in World War I, Uncle Archie, and he lamented the fact that when he was in France, that some of the French people would ask him to let them see his tail, as in his monkey tail. And he said that I went abroad to fight for democracy, and that's the way I was treated. And he used to tell us that you children have to be the Jackie Robinson of your generation. And he sat us on the back porch, and we listened to the radio of the Brooklyn Dodgers games with him. That was never lost on me.
Yeah.
They expected us to be the generation to change things.
You know, when I was 10 years old, I had one of my first very serious brushes with racism. It was often not known if I was black or white, but the guy one of the neighbors obviously knew. He had been living around my family and I for many years, and I went up, and the first time, there was the first riding lawnmower I ever saw. And, being a little knucklehead, curious dude that I was, I ran over and said, well, what's this thing? He said, it's a riding lawnmower, and it had a muffler on it. And the muffler was white. It looked like, and it was dripping, and so it looked like the old freezer you used to have. You know how the frost would build up around the freezer. So I went and asked the guy. I said, "Is that hot or cold?" He said, "It's cold." So I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah, touch it." And I grabbed it, and every time I ever tell this story to this day, I feel that searing pain of grabbing that hot muffler. Sure. And I wanted to kill him. I vowed to myself, I'm going to kill this man when I grow up. Now, when I was at Howard University as a freshman, I went home one day. I saw the ambulance up at his house, and I was wondering what happened. I talked to my mother later that night.
Did you hope he had been killed?
And she said he died, and I was like, damn, he died before I could take him out. I've grown up. Hopefully, I've grown up some since then. Did you want to take people out?
No, I never did. I dealt with things very differently. I just thought about ways to change things so that they wouldn't exist, so that conditions around me could change. I always had delayed responses to a lot of things, too. I guess it was my way of protecting my emotions and psyche. Yeah. We didn't want to kill them. We wanted to make their lives irrelevant. We wanted them to be removed as the obstacles and the barriers to our having our own rights.
Are we in a post-racial society?
Oh, God, no. No.
We got a black president.
Hey, right. And that's the unfortunate thing that not that we have a black president, of course, but that some very deliberately and calculatedly called this a post-racial society because one black man is now president. Conditions haven't changed that much. Since he's been elected, and I don't want to get into what he should have done, but no, we don't live in a post-racial society. Just look at what happened to Trayvon Martin, and happened to all the other thousands of men who are profiled, and the people who still live children who are about to cut off food stamps and cutbacks in Head Start, and just people who are unemployed and denied opportunities, and on and on. And most of all the men who are put in jail every year. Just think of how productive they'd be as fathers and husbands and block captains and deacons in their churches and PTA presidents and so on, if they weren't in jail. I mean,
we're expecting Dr. Cornel West to come at some point here this evening, and I remember often, and I quote him.
It's not one of my favorite people.
Okay, I mean, and he's been getting a lot of criticism, and we want to hear his voice.
Well, I think you should.
Yeah,
and I know him. Him.
The one, but he said something. You know, he said he remains a prisoner. I heard him say years ago, "You remain a prisoner of hope." So I think we do all have to remain a prisoner of hope.
Sure.
Are you hopeful for the future?
Yes, because I think this generation will find its voice and will begin to change things. If I didn't have hope, I would be in despair, and I will not allow myself to be in despair.
What I need to do is, I think they might have been telling me we need to go to a commercial break, but I needed to hold that up because you make a statement, and you certainly didn't bite your tongue.
No.
Cornel West is not one of my favorite people. He's been a lightning rod as of late, especially since Barack Obama has been in office.
And I've known Cornel for a long time.
Would you elaborate as to why he's not one of your favorite people?
Sure, because I think that he and Tavis Smiley have made a cottage industry of attacking President Obama. It seems that there's nothing President Obama has done right for them. And I think they came out of the gate as soon as he was elected doing that. I once read that a statement of Cornell's attributed to him when he said that even the bell captain who carried his baggage when he came here for the inauguration had a ticket to the inauguration and he didn't. And I would hope that that wouldn't have been a major motivation for the way he turned on President Obama. There was a lot to criticize against the president, but he and Tavis Smiley never gave the man a chance.
Okay, and we will be talking to him about that, assuming that he makes it here, as has been committed. This is the Rock Newman Show. Today is the 24th of August. We're celebrating and commemorating the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's historic March on Washington. My guest here in studio, a courageous woman, lived through just times of killings and lynchings in Mississippi, and just matter-of-factly kept on doing the work that needed to be done to help change America and help change the world. Dr. Joyce Ladner. Dr. Ladner, your time at Howard University.
I'm glad to talk about that.
My alma mater, a place that I truly love.
I do too.
Tell us about your time there. Give me your highs and lows. And
I've never been asked to talk about it publicly before.
Oh, well, you got to do it here on the Rock Newman Show.
I'm happy to do so. I first went to Howard in 1971 as an associate professor of sociology. I stayed only 2 years because I got married and moved away. But I came back in 1981.
Can I tell you a secret?
Sure.
I went to Howard in 1970 as a freshman.
Yeah, I remember seeing you walking around the campus.
That's right. And I remember seeing you.
Yeah.
And I didn't have enough game to tell you what I wanted to tell you. I've been asking her for a long time to come on my show. And part of what I wanted to confess up in here is I had a major crush on you.
You know, a lot of you young guys did.
Yes, we did.
There's
and look here, and I'm about to tell you something. We had good reason to have a crush on her.
Yeah. I had a big afro that
yes, you did.
Stood 6 inches tall.
Lord have mercy.
But, you know,
I wanted to hold that. I just wanted to hold that. That's 42 years ago, and I just...
You want to touch it now?
Please let me just... Yes, Lord.
Ow, this is so funny. It's funny because, you know...
There is a guy.
I was only 27 when I went to Howard. Uh-huh. And so there was not that big a gap.
No, there wasn't. And it wasn't just your afro we was all looking at either.
Oh, really?
I want to tell you now.
Oh, really? What were y'all looking at?
Padow and padow.
when I was young, but that was my first teaching job. I spent a year teaching young college students in East St. Louis, Illinois, in an alternative program there with Catherine Dunham. Then I went to the King Center, the Institute of the Black World, where I spent a year. And I was just traveling. I was just curious about doing a lot of things. Then I went to Tanzania, to the University of Dar es Salaam on a postdoctorate. And I had a good friend, Andy Billingsley, who said, Joyce, when are you going to settle down and start your real career? And I said, okay, I didn't have a job. And he said, you want to come to Howard? I said, fine, why not? Yeah. I was living life on the edge anyway, you know.
Yeah. Damn, I wish I'd known that.
Not your kind of edge. I had a number of young male students in my classes, and one of them, Billy Martin, very esteemed lawyer now.
Yes.
Used to come to my office.
Represented Monica Lewinsky.
Yeah, a lot of people.
And a whole bunch of other folks.
Billy used to come to my office and say, when are you going to go out with me? And I said, I don't date students. Yeah. And I didn't. And I stuck to that. And I wrote a letter of reference for him to get into law school, University of Cincinnati. He's done very well.
I'm just so happy I had an opportunity to express myself here today.
What's your wife going to say if she...
Well, I mean, she wasn't my wife then.
Oh, this is so funny.
We must take a break. We're forced to take a break here. We're having a whole bunch of fun on the Rock Newman Show. Yeah. Hope you are too. Yeah. See you when you come back in a few moments. All right. Hello to all my friends in the DMV. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor.
Stop at the drug
and now, the Rock Newman Show.
Everybody was.
Welcome back, folks, to the Rock Newman Show. We're broadcasting live from the Langston Hughes Room at Busboys and Poets. Dr. Joyce Ladner is in studio with us, and we've been joined for this segment by William P. Jones. He is the author of The March on Washington. William P. Jones, welcome to the Rock Newman Show. Please excuse the reach over.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us. The March on Washington. Why did you do it, and what did you want to tell?
Well, I was doing research actually in another book, and I found a collection of papers related to the Negro American Labor Council, which is the organization that initiated and did much of the early organizing of the March on Washington in 1963. A. Philip Randolph was the president of the Negro American Labor Council, and it's an organization that is virtually left out of the history of the civil rights movement. It's barely mentioned. If it is, it's often dismissed as a paper organization. And I found I found these papers related to it, and I thought, here's an event that everybody knows about, but a really central aspect of its history we've never really heard about. So I wanted to write that history.
You know, I want to come back to something Joyce mentioned, working with SNCC and a couple of from each area. SNCC volunteers went up to New York to work with Bayard Rustin. Bayard, he said he's Bayard. He referred to himself as Bayard Rustin. Right. And one of the real untold stories is the incredible. This man, I would say, was the backbone of that march.
Right.
That's
and
right.
Fully unacknowledged, mostly unacknowledged. Joyce, you were on the scene at that time. Are you at all aware of the things that were said? Was like, man, he's a hell of an organizer and he's putting this all together, but we can't in any way put him out front. Are you familiar with any of the dynamics and the politics that were going on at that time?
Yeah, I was, because what had happened is that the leaders of the major civil rights organizations were very, except for John Lewis and James Farmer, were very uneasy about having Bayard be the chief organizer, and that was because he's gay. Some people had called him a communist, even though he flirted with the communist youth organization in the 30s and was not a communist. And that he had an arrest record for what they called a morals charge. I guess some public homosexual activity. It was only after Mr. Randolph said essentially that he would be responsible for him. And they didn't dare cross Mr. Randolph because he was the venerable old man who had been out there long before the other civil rights leaders actually joined. Bayard never lived his life in the closet. He was always out. He didn't know there was a closet. He was
outly, overtly homosexual.
Yeah, he was gay.
Right.
He had a partner. It didn't matter to us. I mean, why would it matter? He didn't bring it into his work make it central to his work or performance or anything else. And he used to entertain us at his house. He had the most wonderful voice, especially when he sang Negro spirituals. You can find those on YouTube as well. He had this great African art collection of masks and walking canes. And he was just he was a Renaissance man. I mean, I'd never met anybody like him. But what I appreciated most was that we had these staff meetings every day at the end of our work, usually at night. And he valued what I said as much as he did anyone else's on the staff, even though I was the youngest. He was very generous. To work for Bayard was to work for a masterful teacher. He had this great ability to conceptualize the big picture of what this march was going to end up being. But then, bit by bit, he could conceive of all the intricate parts that had to come together. And it was like synchronicity, like a ballet dancer on stage. I mean, it was fantastic.
Masterful.
I learned a lot from him.
Does your book address any of that?
Very much. I mean, it shows Rustin's really central role in building what was the March on Washington movement in 1942 that A. Philip Randolph helped to build. And really the experience that, the relationship that A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin had that led A. Philip Randolph to identify him as the person who should build this march and be the director of the march. And his initial plan was, he said, the director of the march should be Bayard Rustin. And because of the objections, A. Philip Randolph said, well, I'll be the director of the march, but he will be my associate director, and essentially turned everything all over and the day-to-day operations.
I'm curious about something. A. Philip Randolph was the organizer. He was the backbone of this march, and he was not allowed to take a bow. He didn't speak.
Yes, he did.
He did.
Bayard spoke. Okay.
Oh,
No, he
Rustin.
Bayard.
Are you talking about Rustin or Randolph?
No. No, I'm talking about,
Bayard.
yes.
No, Bayard read the list of, what was it called?
The demands.
The men's at the very end.
Yeah.
The guys, the men who, the leaders of the major civil rights organizations, were very involved in exactly what was going to be on the program. I don't think Bayard expected to have a speaking role as an organizer. I mean, organizers generally recede into the background. I don't remember there having been any discussion, and certainly not on his part, or concern on his part, that he'd be out front. I mean, he was the one who was putting all the pieces together, even that day. I mean, you could see him in the films moving around on stage, still being the organizer.
Yeah.
I don't think that he saw that as his role.
But still, there was a concerted effort not to highlight what was his significant role.
No, I would say it in a different way. I think that once Mr. Randolph said, Bayard, I will be responsible for what happens with Bayard. All the other guys backed off. Bayard, no one else could have put that march together except him. And they understood that. They understood their own limitations. What was the Bayard once said that Martin couldn't organize himself out of not a brown paper bag, something like that. Yeah. But each person had their own strengths.
Okay.
Yeah. King was not an organizer.
And there is, I think it's important to remember that there was significant attention to Bayard Rustin at the time. I mean, he's been forgotten, but he wasn't completely left out. I mean,
No.
Life magazine, for example, the cover was a picture of Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph, and the headline was "The Leaders."
Yeah, something regarding 2013, and frankly speaking, I'd like you all to pay attention because it's just something that is somewhat perplexing to me. All the leading civil rights organizations were pulled together in Washington, D.C. to commemorate the 50th anniversary of this Martin Luther King's speech. Religious leaders from all over the country were here today. They, all organizations were represented. Someone on October the 16th, 1995, made a call for a Million Man March. His name was Louis Farrakhan. And more than 1 million people showed up. And he was not invited to participate in the march. And as we talk about Bayard Rustin, that to me is sort of an elephant that is in the room that I think would make for some interesting conversation.
Well, I think an interesting conversation here today is that Malcolm X came to Washington and he didn't go out on the mall for the march in 1963, but right after the march was over, my sister and I walked back to the Statler Hilton at 16th and K, and who is in the lobby except Malcolm? And he's expounding on what he called the farce on Washington. And all these reporters were gathered around. We stopped and listened to him for a while. A number of other people did too, but he was there. And a lot of Muslim people came to the march as well. A lot of nation people came and brought their families. It's an unacknowledged part of what happened, but it was funny to see Malcolm. I described it as ramrod straight. Just posture was incredible. Copper skin and reddish hair, and he had a dignity about him, a tremendous charisma. I had seen him a lot on 125th Street during the summer. On Saturday mornings on my way to work, he was standing out preaching and so on. But to see him right there, he came to the scene, but he didn't go to the mall. But he still came to have his own presence here.
I just wonder, back to the point about Minister Farrakhan being a religious leader and obviously a significant force in the African-American community, what it is, why it would be that he would not be invited. Is that something that you think that the organizers are uncomfortable to talk about?
I really don't know. I would imagine that if he had come, he probably would have taken it over because of his charisma. I don't know. Yeah. Is that what Cora said was all right? He has a presence about him. I don't know why they didn't invite him, but I think he certainly, had he come and spoken, there would have been a lot of people who responded to him for sure.
You know, there's a picture in my book, actually, of a rally in Harlem in 1962, just a year before the march. And it's a picture of Malcolm X speaking. And it's a rally organized by A. Philip Randolph and Anna Hedgeman, who were the principal organizers. You must have worked very closely with Anna.
Exactly.
Hedgeman. And what's interesting is that I think that the principal reason that he was not involved in the march was that because of the prescription within the Nation of Islam of not being directly involved in politics, and Elijah Muhammad actually very clearly said that they should not be involved in this because of that position, not a sort of ideological difference with the march, but that they just avoided politics. And he changed very rapidly in the year following the march, becoming more, and left the Nation of Islam largely over wanting to be more directly involved in politics. So I don't think it was so much a sort of a difference of opinion initially. I think he was very critical after the march.
But those people who were the big six leaders of the major civil rights organizations, Roy Wilkins, A. Philip Randolph, John Lewis, Martin King, James Farmer, who was in jail in Plaquemine Mountain Parish, Louisiana, when the march took place. And he didn't bail himself out. He stayed there, but jail and no bail. And Floyd McKissick, his deputy, spoke instead. That was a group of people who believed in racial integration. They would never have invited Malcolm to speak on that program.
At that time?
No.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big missing figure in the leadership of that march is Dorothy Height, because she worked very closely in organizing the march. She shared the political positions of all the organizers. Anna Hedgeman pressured Randolph to invite her to be within the official leadership of the march.
But she was on the administrative committee.
She was on the administrative committee.
She and Anna Arnold Hedgeman were the two women on the administrative committee. She used to come up to the office all the time.
Yeah.
You know.
Your book talks about the exclusion of women.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a much more important, phenomenon.
And what is your research as you put this book together tell you about why a giant like Dorothy Height was not allowed to have a prominent speaking role?
Well, the reason that was given, and you probably heard these reasons. I mean, the reason that was given was that the official organizations, the sponsoring organizations, had lots of women in them, and so women were represented by these male leaders, and that was the official position as to why Dorothy Height could not be on. Yeah.
The sponsoring organizations were all headed by men. Mm-hmm. So the logic of it, whether one agreed with it or not, was that the leaders of the organizations were speaking. And the additional role of speaker was for Walter Reuther for labor. The AFL-CIO did not join in. And then there were religious organizations. All the major religious people were on the program for invocation or benediction or whatever. Now, one could argue that the National Council of Negro Women should have been a sponsoring organization, because it certainly could have been as much of a civil rights organization as the Urban League, which was not, your mainstream civil rights organization. But I don't recall there being, I think that the era today is that so many people use a 2013 perspective on feminism, etc., and superimpose it on half a century ago. Mm-hmm. People were not, I wasn't that conscious of being a woman activist at all. I wasn't at all, quite frankly. For me, the big enemy was racism. Mm-hmm. And you have to try to go back and put yourself in that perspective. Sure. And it bothers me that, one person just said that women were so excluded that there were 2 marches, which is preposterous. That's wrong. That's not even... What happened is that the leaders marched with the media on one street and everybody else on the other. What happened is that when the people started getting off those buses, off the trains, and those 10 planes that were chartered, not 10 trains rather, and 200 buses and I forgot how many planes. What happened is that they immediately started marching toward the mall. And the leaders at the time were up on Capitol Hill meeting with Congress people. When they learned that the people had already stepped off, they got in car, people put them in cars and drove them to the front of the line. That's what really happened. So all the conjecture about there being some people on one street and some on the other had nothing to do with feminism or the absence thereof. It was other things, and it really bothers me when people try to see some discrimination against women under every single rock back then.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think that's right. I mean, there has been some reporting about 2 marches, and I think that's, I see no evidence of it. I do think that there was an important conflict with it. I mean, Anna Hedgeman wrote a very angry letter to A. Philip Randolph saying, we need to have women represented officially in this march. Right. Polly Murray suggested picketing A. Philip Randolph when he spoke at the National Press Club, and a number of women said, no, we cannot allow this to derail this wonderful event. So I think it was actually, there was a serious tension, but it remained largely behind the scenes.
William P. Jones, author of The March on Washington. Where can folks get your book? We've got a few seconds left.
I think you can get it right here. You can get it at any bookstore. Here it is.
Busboys and Poets?
Yep, The March on Washington, Jobs, Freedom, and the Forgotten History of Civil Rights.
Thank you both so much for appearing on the Rock Newman Show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming up next, we'll see who we have in the house. If Reverend Jesse Jackson is due and if Dr. Cornel West is due. On the Rock Newman Show, we'll be back in just a moment.
Rock Newman Show. It's the Rock Newman Show. Rock Newman Show.